Okay. So should I,
Yeah, go for it.
we're live. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. We're live on Facebook. Welcome. And we have a really good webinar today organized by Paul Hyun. I don't know if Ani can tell you if your relationship is in trouble, but she can certainly tell you what legal steps you can take to protect your status. Wanted to say that we have 3 webinars scheduled for the next 3 sessions. This Sunday, we're gonna do that with Bayo, who is an attorney, a staff attorney of the transgender defense. I think it's a defense fund organization, my bad. But she's a Brooklyn activist, a Latina lawyer, and will Transgender Legal Defense Fund. That's the name of the organization. So she's going to join us and talk about the recent Supreme Court case, and we'll have a discussion about LGBTQ pride. A week from tonight, we're going to have a discussion about policing and racial justice with Mark Nason, who's the chair of the African American Studies Department at Fordham University, and Jared Trujillo, who is the head of the legal aid attorneys in New York City and a prominent activist. And then also next Sunday, we'll be back to real estate, talking about the mortgage situation in our current environment and COVID. So that should be informative as well. So I will turn this over to Paul. Go ahead, Paul.
Oh, Paul, you're muted.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, well, today we've got Ani Mason, who I actually went to law school with at NYU, and she is a matrimonial attorney and mediator, an excellent attorney, I'm sure an excellent mediator also, and all-around awesome person. So I'm very excited to hear from her. She works in New York, and it's an interesting time. I think there was a lot of talk about like separation and divorce, but there's also things related to marriage that Ani's going to talk about. So without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to her.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here, and just like I'm going to go through hopefully what you're seeing on your screen, the little outline that I put together to guide my talk. But please just jump in with questions, and I'm happy to answer them as we go. So, it goes without saying that the last 3 months have been an incredibly stressful time for people. And I'm seeing that come up in my own practice with individuals who are getting married, considering divorce, in the midst of a divorce, or post-divorce, and trying to, live by their separation agreement. So I just wanted to share, what am I seeing come up for people at that sort of 30,000 foot view, and a few very high level like tips and insights if that's a situation that you're currently in. So as I alluded to, there are sort of, as I thought about it, there are like 4 categories of people who have been coming to me, individuals or couples who've been coming to me with issues related to living in this COVID world that we're in now. And so those are people who are not yet married, but anticipate getting married. And I just want to flag that I'm not gonna speak to the large number of couples who are married and staying married and not considering divorce. And if that's your situation, I think that's wonderful. You probably haven't signed into this webinar. So I'm gonna skip that large group of couples, but then move on to couples who they are married, they're not yet divorcing, but one or both of them are considering a divorce, and what I'm seeing come up for people in that situation in a COVID world. And then for those couples who had, started the divorce process or have been in the divorce process, are divorcing currently, and are going through a divorce in a global pandemic and economic meltdown. So a little bit of insult to injury there, a little stressful. And then people who are, their divorce is behind them, but they're still living by their parenting agreement, and they're still living by their financial agreements. And how is that changing and what's coming up for them amidst COVID? So first of all, for couples who are engaged and planning a wedding, what I'm seeing is the following. Ceremonies, the large parties and events that were planned for this spring, this summer, even this fall, what I'm observing is that people are postponing those and doing one of two things. Either they're not going to have a big ceremony, but they're just having a little Zoom ceremony, and they feel like, well, when better than now to do that? So they may be moving up their wedding date, or they may say, look, we'll have our actual party, next summer. But in the meantime, we would like to be legally married. So we're just going to have our officiant who's already, approved. They're going to marry us. And also through that are kind of accelerating the date of their legal marriage. So for those couples, if they were thinking about getting a prenup, a prenuptial agreement, that's accelerating the deadline. If they're accelerating the date of their marriage, they're accelerating the deadline for their prenup. So I've had a number of people and couples reach out in the following situation. Like, we were thinking about getting married in the fall. That was our date. We've postponed it till next summer, but I think we're going to get legally married, hopefully this month. Can we do a prenup? So the biggest thing that I want to flag there is with prenups, if you are in this situation, you do want to give yourself time. It's not, even if you think you may want a simple prenup, and indeed you may ultimately have a simple prenup, it is always somewhat of a complex document to put together, and it takes some time. Ideally, you have a number of months to put a prenup together before you're married. And if you don't, it doesn't mean it's impossible, but if you're in that situation, my biggest tip for you is to get in touch with an attorney or a mediator ASAP. You really want to leave yourself a lot of time and not be rushed in any way to finish that, what is a pretty complex legal document, the night before your wedding. So the other thing that I think is sometimes confusing to people is like, okay, well, we live in New York, but we're getting married in Utah, or maybe you were getting married in Utah, but not anymore. Now it's Zoom in your apartment in Brooklyn, but we're going to move to DC next year. So like, do we get a New York lawyer? Do we get a DC lawyer? And in essence, a prenup speaks to, what happens in the event you divorce, and what happens in the event one of you passes away. Ideally, if you're getting a prenup, you would have a prenup in the created by attorneys in the state in which you might ultimately divorce or might ultimately pass away. Of course, no one knows. Many people don't know where that's going to be. So what I would say to you is this: if you're living in New York and you have no plans to move out of New York as a couple, no imminent plans to move out of New York, it makes sense to talk with a New York attorney or mediator about a prenup. If you are moving to DC or Connecticut next year and have no plans to leave there, probably makes more sense to talk to an attorney in that state and have an agreement drafted in that state. So if that's something you have questions about, I'm more than happy to field questions and to refer to practitioners in other states as is relevant for people. So that's for the segment of couples who are getting married or preparing to be married. And let me just pause there. Any questions or anything that's unclear there, guys, before I move on?
Have you dealt with anyone who, because we see people who they're not sure if they want to move up to Connecticut or Westchester or New Jersey. And
yep.
You got 3 different states. What if you were about to get married?
Yeah.
Or what if you had a prenup, and now you're thinking that you're going to be moved to a different state?
So let me answer your second question first, because come up a fair amount. If you have a prenup and you're going to be moving to a different state, the most responsible thing to do is to have that prenup reviewed by an attorney in that state. Because let's say you had a prenup drafted by a New York attorney and you moved to Arizona. I don't know anything about Arizona family law, and I hope and assume that all of what I drafted for you in New York will be enforceable in Arizona, but I can't guarantee that. You know, no New York attorney can tell you that. So if it's important to you that the terms of your prenup would be honored in the event you ever were to divorce, and you have made a long-term or permanent move somewhere, I personally, I would have an attorney in that jurisdiction review the document for me and just give me feedback. Like, is there anything concerning in this that wouldn't be enforced? It happens a lot between New York and California, I'll say. And I've had a number of couples have their New York prenups reviewed by California colleagues of mine, and vice versa. I've reviewed prenups done by California colleagues of mine for couples who have moved back to New York. So that's sort of the most protective thing to do. What percentage of couples who have prenups actually do that? Probably a minority of couples in reality, but from the perspective of a matrimonial attorney, that's what you would want to do.
Are there big, sorry to interrupt you. Are there big differences in like the law as it applies between, let's just say, the tri-state area?
Yes. Oh God. Well, I'll say yes with hesitation, because I don't know New Jersey or Connecticut law, but yes, I like child support is totally different in all three states. And I can tell you, I'll never forget being in a training where a colleague of mine who used to be a New York practitioner and now practices in Westport, Connecticut, was describing something to us about how if you had an inheritance in Connecticut that you kept completely separate, but a lot of years had passed in the marriage, that inheritance might become shared by the spouses. I hope I'm not butchering Connecticut law, but that was the gist of it. And all of the New York matrimonial attorneys at that training, our jaws collectively dropped, because that is in the fact pattern that we gave him, where the person had kept their stuff completely separate, not done any of the things that could make an inheritance marital. It was possibly going to be shared. And that was astonishing to us. And I am recalling, but I don't remember the details of when I was negotiating a prenup where the couple was in New York, but thinking of moving to Massachusetts. They ultimately wanted a New York prenup, but there were components of Massachusetts law, I want to say it was also around inheritances, that were quite different than New York. So, but with respect to the tri-state area, oh yes, the law is definitely different. Yeah, the age that child support ends is different.
Inheritance is a major reason why people get prenups, right?
Yeah, not only inheritance, but I would say, for sure inheritance or the anticipation of like an inter vivos or like a during the lifetime of family member or whoever gift to you. And then the biggest place where this gets complicated is, as you guys probably see, with the purchase of real estate. Because so often couples, in particular in New York, where real estate is expensive, the capital that is enabling them to purchase property is not coming from marital savings. It's coming from the savings of one party from prior to the marriage, whether that, maybe that's from an inheritance or a gift, or maybe it's just from their work, and thinking about, clarifying, how do we as a couple want to think about how we, share or attribute ownership to that down payment that's enabling us to purchase this property, or if you're making a couple right now, because maybe you guys are experiencing this. I only know this anecdotally from a few clients, where qualifying for a mortgage has all of a sudden become far more difficult.
Yes.
At least, okay, so they have had to now make an all cash purchase that's coming entirely from one party's family, savings from her family. And then all the more so important to that person to just be clear about how are we attributing, ownership to this level of a contribution of 100% of the purchase value of the property. Yeah. So, all right. So I'll shift to couples who are, let me scroll up a little bit in this document so we can just focus on, for couples who are married and having issues, maybe having issues pre-COVID, but they've intensified amidst COVID. First of all, you're not alone. I mean, and I feel like every other week I'm seeing something in the New York Times about like how to save your marriage mid-pandemic, like pandemic tips for not getting divorced, and everybody, maybe it's just me, maybe people think of me to email this too, but I know I've gotten emailed so many times about the divorce rates in Wuhan, like jumping after people were let out of quarantine. So if you are in quarantine, in particular if you have kids, but even if you don't, and you're feeling like this has been a really stressful and difficult time in your marriage, of course it has. I mean, it's just a stressful and difficult time for everybody. So I just want to like normalize that and say, first of all, I don't, that to me, that you're having issues does not mean that your next step or next stop is divorce. So you want to start by trying to address the issues. I think this is probably quite obvious and intuitive to everyone who's listening, but there are many ways to do that. I mean, go to the New York Times. They've got resources for free. My personal go-to, and I am a strong proponent of, recommending therapy and couples therapy to people. And if people want resources, I have wonderful resources for that. Stitch in Time Saves 9. It is far, far easier, although not easy, to do intensive couples therapy than it is to get divorced. I promise you. So if you're sort of like 6 and 1/2 dozen the other, or you're on the fence, start with working on the relationship if you're still on the fence, and only when you're certain, or when your spouse is certain that it's time to proceed to divorce, do you want to consider going down that path? Because it is, however, easy and efficient and productive we as professionals try to make it, it's still a really difficult process. So if and when you or your spouse have decided like, okay, I'm certain I want to move toward divorce, you want to generally try to understand, like, get a lay of the land first, like a 30,000 foot view. What does this look like? What does this process require of me? What's the timeline? What kind of range of cost am I looking at? Cringe, which is, everybody wants to know, and no one, generally people don't like what they hear because it is expensive. So start by getting a lay of the land, and you can do that with a consultation, obviously with a divorce professional, with a mediator or an attorney, but you can also do your own online research, and more people are doing that. I want to give a caveat that as with anything, a lot of what's online is of spotty quality. Some of it is garbage. Some of it is great. A lot of it is in between. There are podcasts out there that are decent. I don't know a lot of them. I have my own podcast, which is called The Divorce Field Guide. You're more than welcome to check it out. It's totally free. I've, I think like 95, almost 100 episodes, got a little waylaid by COVID, but I'm going to be back, get back to it soon enough. But, that if you're wondering, like, what is how's mediation work, or what's collaborative law? What does it mean to go to litigation? Do I need a divorce coach? I've, episodes on all that. So welcome to check that out. And then I really love the website untied.net, also a free resource. Also, like, I'm mentioning both of those things because I know them to be well curated and the content is good. It's trustworthy. So anyway, start with online resources or maybe an initial consultation. When you really are certain that you're ready to move forward, then you want to have an individualized, very targeted, personalized individual consultation with a divorce attorney, just to understand, like, here's my situation, what are my personal next steps? Because it's such an individualized inquiry that you really want to get that guidance, like, right from the get-go. So let me pause there before going on to couples who are in the midst of a divorce process, and anything that I can clarify about what I've just explained, or anything that's confusing. Any questions?
I think you're extremely clear, Ani. So
thank you. Good. I'm trying. Okay, cool. So for those couples who are getting divorced, okay, so I would say, here's what I've observed. From like mid-March to early April, almost everyone took a pause on their divorce. It's just like people were getting the lay of the land. What's happening? Where do I get like food and toilet paper? How do I find masks? Divorce was not forefront of their mind. By mid-April, couples who were divorcing, if they are able to do it in their current setup, like especially if they're living separately, but even couples who are living in the same place, if they can move forward with their divorce and they're working in an out-of-court process, like a mediation process, like a collaborative law process, they're moving forward. That's what I'm observing. People are sort of seeing that, like, okay, COVID's going to be around for a while. We're not getting completely back to normal for a while, and I don't want to pause on my divorce for a year or 2 years until there's a vaccine. So people are moving forward. Whereas people who were in an entirely court-based process, in a full-blown litigation, as we know, like the courts shut down, nothing was happening. They are just now reopening in New York City for regular divorce cases, for non-emergency cases. And what we're seeing is that they're swamped. It's chaotic. No criticism of the courts. I mean, everybody's struggling and doing the best that they can. It's chaotic. There are delays. They have a lot of administrative and safety issues, frankly. They're trying to figure out how to have people safe in the courtrooms. We used to just sit and wait in the courtroom benches next to each other. Not doing that anymore. No one feels comfortable with that anymore. No one wants to take the subway to court anymore. So, for people who are solely in a litigation process, in court, going to court appearances, I would say their processes have been more disrupted. And then, those who are working in mediation or in an out-of-court negotiation are continuing, but we're continuing virtually. I should make clear. I mean, still no one really is meeting in person. And if we are, frankly, it's going to be in person, 10 feet apart, with everybody wearing masks for a period of time. So I'm encouraging clients, and clients are leaning more toward virtual right now as a safer option, as a slightly, frankly, less weird and awkward option without having to wear masks during the session. So let me just say, what are the issues that are coming up for people? They're both, parenting and financial, the substantive issues that are coming up related to COVID. Parenting wise, it's, safety related stuff, health and safety related stuff. It could be that a parent is, working an essential worker, that they're on the front lines, maybe they work in the medical field. And so, gosh, does their parenting schedule need to change? What are we doing temporarily to both give them access to their kids and the kids access to them, but also to protect the kids, to protect the other parent? We're dealing with parents having differing levels of comfort around safety protocols for themselves, with their kids, for, socially distant, socializing with, say, other families who are not in their bubble. So we're navigating that. What I want to say about parenting issues, COVID-related parenting issues, is that frankly, they're not highly legal issues. And the more you can work on those with a family therapist, with a child therapist, with a neutral clinical professional, the better off you are. You could talk to your lawyer, obviously, or your mediator about any of these, and you should, to make sure there's not a complex legal component to them. But by and large, COVID-related parenting issues are best dealt with by a clinical professional, less expensive and more more appropriate for helping you navigate these now quotidian but new considerations of, like, how do we parent in a COVID world in two separate households, nonetheless. And my sense is that the courts, I was saying this to you, Paul, earlier, my sense is that for financial issues, which, people are having, like, decreased income, major changes to their asset values, decreased job security, and just a great increase in their general uncertainty around their finances. I do think that courts are going to be more receptive to those changes and to taking those changes into account than they have been historically. They used to be, I would say, tough. Used to be an uphill battle to get the courts to consider a negative change in your finances if you're going through a divorce. Whereas I think now there's a general acceptance that things have changed financially, and on the whole, not for the better. So I think legally there's going to be a bit more receptivity to that. Whereas my gut is that on the sort of day-to-day parenting conflict around COVID, protocols, that's not an acute emergency, the courts are going to be less patient in dealing with that and just have less. They're dealing with a lot right now and a lot of emergencies. And we have a lot of emergencies going on socially and globally. So the more you can resolve out of court, the better. So, with financial questions, financial issues, if you're going through a divorce, you want to be, what's your next step? You want to be raising those with the professionals you're working with, specifically with the legal and financial professionals you're working with parenting related COVID issues, like, do we have to wear masks indoors or stay 6 feet apart, or can we travel to Long Island or Connecticut on my time with the kids? Those kinds of things, they are not highly legal, and those I would direct more to clinical professionals. So before I talk about couples who are post-divorce and living with, frankly, similar challenges in this COVID world, let me just pause for any questions, anything that's confusing or I can clarify.
I was just wondering, are courts going virtual? Can they do that? I mean, I've been on conference calls with judges before, but not hearing.
So it's a great question. two answers. One, my practice since 2012, so for 8.5 years, has been entirely ADR focused, so entirely focused on mediation and other out-of-court dispute resolution. I don't litigate anymore. So I'm not in court day to day like I used to be. But what I'm hearing from my colleagues is that yes, they are having virtual court appearances. I don't know if those are on video, to be honest. I don't know if they're on video or by phone, but they are having court appearances that are taking place not in person. Yes, that's happening now in New York City.
Right.
Yeah. Brave new world for the courts, not
I'm sure.
Oh my gosh, not the most like technologically adept, although what the heck, neither am I. So not to throw shade at the courts, but I think it's really a lot being thrown at them right now, which is all the more reason that, I think they're really looking to parents to like, come on guys, figure it out, and if you need help from a therapist to figure it out, get help from a therapist. But I think they really want people to do as much as they can on their own, but they accept that the financial stuff can feel pretty acute right now and complex. So anything else before I shift to just talking about couples post-divorce?
I do have a question, but I feel like it could get kind of complex, so maybe I'll ask you about it. What I was wondering about is what about bankruptcy? Do you ever have any? I mean, right now, right? There's a lot of it, right? So, how does that factor into this?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. So, what I was going to say related to that, and the answer may be slightly different as I think about it, depending on whether people are in the process of getting divorced but have not yet agreed to the financial terms of their settlement, like signed their separation agreement or their marital settlement agreement, filed their divorce papers. If they're still negotiating, a major change in your finances, like the declaration of bankruptcy, will absolutely impact the course of your negotiation and what you agree to substantively.
Yeah.
Whereas for those couples who have already negotiated their divorce terms, they signed their agreement, they filed their paperwork with the court, and even if they're already there, but they're still waiting on their divorce judgment, or they've done that and they've gotten their signed divorce judgment back, they're in a very different situation. They have most likely not anticipated COVID or an economic meltdown. I mean, who the heck did, And if they have not anticipated that, their agreement probably doesn't provide for, well, this is going to be my child support, but in the event there's a global pandemic and economic meltdown, my child support will change in the following way. Then they, in some senses, in some areas financially, they're stuck. They're likely stuck. And in other areas, there's likely more room. So actually child support in a way is kind of a bad example, because child support, there are sort of three financial things people address in a divorce. One is the division of their assets and debts. The other is the payment of child support between them. And the third is the payment of alimony or spousal maintenance between them. And with respect to the division of assets and debts, once you sign your agreement about how your assets and debts are being divided, done deal. It's a done deal. And we had this happen with people who divided like Madoff accounts back when that whole crisis happened. And that one person kept the Madoff account and the other person kept the equivalent amount of like real estate. And, bummer for the person who kept the Madoff account, right? And I think that was if I'm remembering, this was like a 2014 case. I think it was the Sykes case. But what I recall is that the court wouldn't reopen. They did not reopen the asset division, even when that person's, $7 million asset went to literally zero. I wonder if, for instance, that happened too to people who like kept all their Bear Stearns deferred comp and all their Bear Stearns stock, and then that went to zero. But anyway, so for asset division, one person declares bankruptcy and, their like unsecured assets are seized. I don't think that would change someone's asset division if it had already been agreed to. Then with respect to spousal maintenance or alimony, it's very hard to change that if you haven't provided for a modification protocol in your agreement. At least in New York, the standard, if you've set alimony by contract, there's a high standard. I think it's extreme and unforeseen hardship to either party if they're asking for a change in what they've agreed to change alimony. Just to meet that bar is going to be next to impossible. But I don't know. Maybe if as a result of COVID, all of someone's assets are wiped out, they have no savings and they've lost their job, maybe that's the kind of situation where the court will entertain a change in alimony. Frankly, right now, it's too soon to know. We don't have any, we don't have any case law on that yet. With respect to child support, depending on what the couple has done in their agreement, whether they've waived a portion of the law related to modifying child support or they've not waived it. If they left the law in place, it's relatively a lot easier, though not easy, to change child support. And if they chose to waive that law, it makes it a little bit harder, but it's still relatively easier than changing spousal maintenance. So bottom line, it can get pretty complicated with wanting to look at changes in your financial agreements. And it depends a lot on what kinds of changes you're wanting to pursue. So that would be the kind of thing where I would not say to somebody, you go talk to your spouse with your family therapist and figure it out, or your ex-spouse. No, you can, but first talk to your lawyer. Talk to your lawyer first on that, because there's just a lot of complex law that impacts what are your chances of getting this resolved. And then that should impact what your chances are in court, should impact your own thinking about your negotiation strategy, how you approach your ex-spouse, or how you talk about it, whether that it's something that you even have a chance of getting without their buy-in or not.
Right.
So that kind of gets a little bit into this, living in a COVID world post-divorce, which is what are the issues that are coming up for people? Well, financial and parenting. So I've already talked a bit about the financial issues, and the parenting issues that are coming up are frankly the same ones that I talked about for people who are getting divorced. It's safety protocols, parenting schedule, navigating travel. Not that a lot of people are jetting off to Europe right now. I don't think anyone's doing that, but in great number. But, for people who are well, I want to be, in my house in Massachusetts for the summer with my kids. And that was my plan pre-COVID, and I intend to go there. And is that still permissible? Or, is it okay for me to see my cousin? She's also been socially distancing. Can I have her around our kids? All these questions are just exploding for people. And that's as true for someone who's getting divorced as it is for somebody who already has their divorce in place and has a divorce agreement. Believe me, it didn't provide for COVID protocols. We didn't have any idea. So you're in new terrain, and I basically have the same advice that I did for people who are getting divorced, which is really the parenting related stuff for COVID that is not highly legal. Maybe check in with your lawyer or mediator and ask them if it's appropriate that you try to work with a neutral clinical professional. But to me, what I have observed thus far, I'm only 3 months in, but working with clinical professional on parenting stuff has been more effective for couples. It's been created less animosity. It's frankly less expensive. And there's not a definitive legal answer to whether or not you're allowed to go to Massachusetts with your kids for the summer if your divorce agreement said that you could, but now there's COVID. We don't know. We don't know. And it would probably, if you went to court on that issue, A, the court would probably be annoyed, and B, we don't know. It would depend on the judge's own subjective perspective and preferences. So for that reason alone, if you can work it out, work something out with your ex with the assistance of a neutral, you want to do that. So I don't know if there's anything more that I want to add about that, but other than just to, pause and stop for any questions about that. But it's not highly dissimilar for those couples who are, post-divorce, the issues that are coming up. I would just say financially, couples who are already divorced have a bit more challenge in revisiting the agreements, the financial agreements they made in their divorce agreement. The couples who are still negotiating the contract now, they're almost a little bit more fortunate in that sense, because they can take the COVID changes into account more fluidly than the couples who are already divorced, made their agreements, and now they're yikes, things have changed. Can I even change my financial agreements? And the answer is it depends.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so that was a whirlwind. I know that's a lot of information. I hope it wasn't too much, but I'm trying to jam in as much as I can in 30 minutes.
No, I totally get it. Sometimes I feel like that after I talk to a new buyer or seller. It's I just need you a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Scott, do you have any questions?
Can we pull the PDF off now?
Oh yeah, sure. Let me stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because Okay, great. Well, that was great, Ani. I thought it was really informative, and you got a lot of ground covered in a short period of time, so we thank you. I wanted to mention that if there are questions, even post this webinar, that you can email them to us at the scottkleinteam@compass.com. Paul, do you have any more questions?
Well, Ani, what's your email address if people
Oh,
want to?
sure. So
Yes.
people are more than welcome. Yeah, more than welcome to email me if you have questions, want referrals, anything. It's Ani, which is ANI at Mason, MASON, matrimonial.com. And matrimonial, MATRIMONIAL.com.
That's good. Okay, that is great and helpful. So I just wanted to thank you again and thank Paul for inviting Ani. And again, I'll just recap. I'll just go join us again Sunday morning with talking about Pride and the recent Supreme Court decision with Alejandro Caraballo, excuse me. It's been a long day. Who's terrific, lives in Brooklyn, is an attorney with the Transgender Legal Defense Fund. So we think that'll be very interesting discussion and a way to observe and celebrate Pride Month. So I don't know if there's any other thing we need to discuss, Paul, but I think
really, market might be opening up again next week.
Oh, yes. Yes. Well, no, I think on Monday we can show again. That's my understanding.
That's great.
What did de Blasio say today that we're entering?
Cuomo said phase 2 begins Monday.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, good thing our listings are going to be ready.
That's true.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that is true. So, we'll talk about that a little bit on Sunday also. We'll just throw that in for good measure, since the next day we will be back working in a limited way, but still be able to show properties again. So, all right. Well, thank you both again very much.
Thank you, Ani. Really great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure, really. Thank you.
Our pleasure. So everyone have a good night and stay safe and keep fighting for justice and change. It's what we need to do every day.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Okay, good night.
Good night. Bye.